Hello guys, welcome back to my AWS tutorial. This is tutorial number 5. So in this tutorial we are going to learn about DynamoDB and API gateway in AWS environment. So whereas coming to the DynamoDB, first we will go through all the basics of like the SQL database, NoSQL database, I mean like the relational database, non-relational database. Then after like getting understanding about the NoSQL database, which is at the DynamoDB, AWS DynamoDB, then we will go through the write capacity units and read capacity units, and also we will learn about global secondary index and local secondary index. Then we will also go through the time to live, which is TTL, which is one of the very important concepts in AWS DynamoDB. And also after that we will learn about AWS API gateway. First we will just go through with the architectural diagrams to understand what is AWS API gateway. Then after we can start learning about stages and deployments. Then we will go through the canary deployments. Yeah, let's get started. So now if we go to the agenda, so these are the topics that we are like going to cover in these video. First we will go through the Amazon DynamoDB. Then after we will once after finishing AWS DynamoDB, then we will go through AWS API gateway. So let's get started by understanding the basics of AWS DynamoDB. Before that, let's understand the database fundamentals. So in database fundamentals we have like the SQL and non-SQL. The SQL is completely with the relational database, and the NoSQL is which is like the non-relational database. And let's understand what is a database. A database is something which is a system, which is a physical machine which is used to store like the application data, or like the user data, or like any data in a device. So here like a database is a system for storing and managing application data, and we have like the two different approaches to modeling the data. One is a SQL database, which is a relational database management system, and other one is the modern database, that's NoSQL, which is the DynamoDB. Whereas in the SQL database, everything the data is stored is interconnected in the tables, which we call it as a relational database, and we can fetch all the results from the database using the SQL language. And in non-relational database, it is in a distributed form. Like we have like the keys, and we will have the attributes for the NoSQL database. So in a NoSQL database, everything like it is also stored in a table and column format, but here we have the keys and the attributes in NoSQL database in DynamoDB. And whereas the data model in traditional database, it's like completely predefined tables and the columns, and also everything is interconnected with the primary keys, foreign keys, constraints. And whereas like in NoSQL database, it is like flexible, which is easy to query in one row. And the biggest strengths of the traditional database is like the complex queries, joins, and aggregations, like the sum average count we can do with the traditional database. But whereas the strengths of the NoSQL database is like the massive horizontal scaling and speed. I mean like we can increase the number of WCU and RCU by horizontal scaling, and also which ultimately increase the speed of the database. I mean like storing in terms of writing or in terms of reading. And whereas coming to scaling, which is primarily vertical, which is like more powerful with the server. Here like we are doing with the horizontal scaling with more servers, whereas in the traditional database we are doing it with the vertical scaling, which by increasing the RAM and the CPU, and also the storage capacity for the regular traditional database. And let's go through the limitations. The scaling is like more complex and it's costly in the traditional database, whereas in modern database, which is NoSQL, which we does not support like the complex joins. There won't be any primary keys or like the foreign keys in the NoSQL, which is DynamoDB. So everything is like we can have the SQL queries, but we cannot run the complex SQL queries in the DynamoDB. Why we cannot run the complex SQL queries is because it's a non-relational database, and also it doesn't support any complex joins. So that's the reason we don't go with the complex queries in NoSQL database. Still, it supports some of the SQL queries. They are like the select from where commands, which are used to like get some results from the tables. And the example for the traditional database, there are like so many examples. They are like MySQL database, PostgreSQL, MS SQL Server, etc. And in modern database, we have like our like ongoing discussion on Amazon DynamoDB. Okay, this is the major difference between the traditional and the modern database. Now let's go to the next slide. So in this slide, we are like seeing the different kinds of like the database available in AWS Amazon Web Services. One is the Amazon Aurora, which is the replica of MySQL database, but whereas compared to the MySQL database, Amazon Aurora is super fast, super efficient, and cost effective, which is trusted by like so many customers in the market out there. And whereas the Amazon document DB, which is the compatibility with the MongoDB, like where we can have like the Amazon like document DB elastic clusters using the Amazon document DB. And also the DynamoDB, where the DynamoDB, Amazon DynamoDB contains like the attributes and items, as I mentioned earlier. And also Amazon DynamoDB Accelerator, which is DAX. DAX is a super powerful database, which will like increase the capacity and also performance of the database, and we need to pay more to use the DynamoDB Accelerator. And also we have the DynamoDB Streams, where we can stream our data to use it to the Kinesis data streams to Kinesis data firehouse to store in a different database. And also like it has the standard access to the tables and also standard infrequent access table class. Like these are like the different kinds of storage classes. One is the standard access table, which will fetch the record based on the requirement, and infrequent access, which will slowly fetch the record from the database. This is all about the database, about like the database in the AWS. Also we do have like the non-relational database like PostgreSQL, MySQL, MS SQL Server, which was not mentioned here. Let's go back to the next one, which is the application integration with the DynamoDB. So we can integrate the DynamoDB with the simple notification service, which is SNS, to send the email notification, HTTP notification, and also like that we can send it to the topic in simple queue services. And also we can integrate this DynamoDB to Kinesis data streams. Also we can implement the Lambda function, Kinesis data firehouse. There are like so many application integrations can be happened with the DynamoDB. Now if you look into the read and write capacity modes, this is something which will control the read and write throughput. We have like two modes. One is the provision mode and the other one is the on-demand mode. Provision mode, which is like tables must have provisioned with the read and write capacity units, whereas RCU is something read capacity units and WCU is write capacity units. Read capacity unit is like the throughput for reads, and write capacity units is the like throughputs for writes. And like there is an option to set up the auto scaling for the throughput to meet the demand when there is a huge spike in the load on DynamoDB. For read operation, we can increase the read capacity unit. For if there is like too much of write operation performing on the database, then we can use the write capacity units. And whenever like the throughput can be exceeded like temporarily using like the burst capacity, if the burst capacity has consumed, like we will get a provision throughput exceeded exception, which is like when there is like increased number of read or write operations are happening on a database beyond the limit, then we will get a provisioned throughput exceeded exception. And it is like advisor to implement, which the we call as exponential back of retry, which is very important to read back those events which are like dead lettered in like the simple queue services. And whereas on demand mode, this will be having like the read and write capacity automatically like scale up and scale down with the workload, with on demand on workload. I mean, like we don't need to worry about like the read and write capacity units. It it, it will automatically scale up and down based upon the workload. And also like we can get unlimited WCU and RCU without any throttling. And but it is, keep in mind, but this on demand mode for like DynamoDB is super expensive to have, and it is 2.5% more faster than more expensive than the provision mode, which you can consider how complex it is, like how expensive is it to buy. And these are like used mostly for like the unknown workloads and unpredictable application traffics, which we use the on demand mode. Now let's get back to the other one. So the main core data operations on the DynamoDB are like the put item, get item, update item, and the delete item. Put item, which will like creates a new item in the database, or like replaces an item entirely in the database. Whereas get item, which will retrieve or which will fetch the record from the database using its primary key. And update item, which will modify the specific attribute of an existing item. Whereas like the delete item will remove the single item from the table, it won't delete the entire table. Whereas in the batch operations, we have batch write operation and batch get operation. Batch write and batch get is like mostly used to decrease the load on the database. By using batch write and batch get or batch read operations, it will directly fetch all the information, all the records based upon our requirement, and it will decrease the complete load on the database. So that's all the operations that we have in the DynamoDB. Now let's go through this simple architecture of the DynamoDB of a web application. So in this architecture, if we take a look, we have Amazon Route 53, which we use it to store the DNS record and change the DNS record or swap the DNS record. When a user calls the domain name, then it will reach to the Amazon API gateway, which we are going to discuss in the next section. And this API gateway is going to invoke the lambda function, and the lambda function will execute. Then after, it will get the results from the DynamoDB database. So this is a kind of simple architecture which is like mostly used in the web applications. So this is all about the DynamoDB. So in next video we will learn about API gateway.